Okay, this next question comes from Jason, and he asks, what happens when a founder leaves your enterprise? And I'll generalize that a little bit to say, what do you do about any employee that might be involved in patents leaves your enterprise? So, it's really common to have this situation where an early stage participant in the enterprise moves along for whatever reason, right? Maybe a new opportunity, maybe they want to work at a big company. But I think you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best in these circumstances. Is that person may be leaving because they want to compete with you down the street. Back in my engineering days, I worked at a company that set up shop across the street from where all the engineers came from. They started developing their own product, and that burgeoned into a serious competitor to their own old employer. So you have what I generally term as leakage problems associated with employees leaving and other circumstances. So for this sort of leakage problem, what you want to have in place is hopefully every employee signs what's called an Invention Agreement. And that just says that part of their responsibilities is to participate in the innovation program, and all their ideas that are related to the business and on company resources and on company time are owned by the company. So that if they leave and want to set up shop across the street and do the same thing and start competing with Jason's enterprise, they can't bring their intellectual property with them. They can start up another business across the street, they can do something completely different, but if what they plan to do is to take patent ideas or maybe trade secret ideas or other know-how, take that intellectual property and get a jump start on developing a similar product, you want to be able to prevent them from doing that. You want to prevent this leakage from the enterprise. So how do you go about doing that? One way is if you're regularly filing patents. If they try and set up across the street with similar stuff, they're going to likely trample on those patent rights. I had this happen with a client of mine the other day, and the person announced that they were leaving, going to an adjacent company that seemingly wants to do a pretty similar thing. So we quickly got together and wrote a bunch of patent applications and filed it. In fact, sent that individual letter to say, hey, by the way, just want to remind you, you signed this invention agreement, and we have existing patents, and we filed a bunch more after you left. So good luck developing that product across the street. You're really going to run into problems. You also want to have a trade secret program where there's certain things that you wouldn't necessarily file on a patent on, and those would remain as trade secrets. Now you have to kind of have an inventory of those. You have to put protections in place, and then when the person leaves, you might remind them about that, right? And every enterprise has trade secrets. It may be who your customers are, who your suppliers are, who your employees are, just kind of basic information that would be required to set up across the street. And certainly if any employee leaves with any of that stuff written down, something over and above what's in their head, in the US certainly you have the ability to stop them from capitalizing on that. It's a big issue. So if the founder's leaving and it's completely unrelated, great. You would want all the alumni from your enterprise to be successful, and it's a small world, and you want them to remember their time fondly. But more often than not, that person has designs on doing something that may interfere, if not now or in the near future, with what your enterprise is doing, Jason. So having the invention agreement, often companies will have a secrecy agreement also. It says it reminds them about the trade secrets and what they have to keep confidential. Sometimes they'll have non-compete agreements, which are more or less enforceable depending on what part of the country you're in. And even, agreements to not recruit employees after they leave. And having that in place, and sometimes with founders, you're very informal when you first start out, and you don't want to hire a lawyer, so you don't have this stuff in place. So you want to, once the enterprise gets some traction and real, and you have some budget, you want to have the secrecy agreements. You want to have the Invention Agreement. You might even have a company handbook that talks about some of these things that's easier to introduce in the future. And then inventory and know what your trade secrets are, and file patents on a regular basis. And that makes it difficult for somebody to, after your enterprise has come up with the winning formula on something, to set up across the street. A lot less of experimentation required because you've already paid for it. Set up across the street and be able to come up with a competing product. And a well-designed intellectual property capture program will help in that regard, right? And hopefully it's enough to keep at least honest people honest. It's hard to keep true crooks in line, but you put it in place. When somebody leaves, you remind them of their obligations, and then keep an eye on it. And if you find out that they're doing something nefarious, go talk to your lawyer and maybe send them a cease and desist letter. And that's what intellectual property, your investment in innovation and that protection through intellectual property will protect against. So hope that answers your question. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the comments below, and maybe I'll get to them in my next weekly video. Thanks so much. Everybody stay safe.